Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Panwar, who's going to take us through a little bit of a brighter moment that we should be able to realize in Indian history, which is Aatmanirbharta. This word has been used, overused, underused. It's your decision. I'm not here to, put that across to you. But this word is being used very often within our lingo with regards to pretty much everything that happens around the place. What we are going to focus on is defense. We realize the importance of this particular thing, especially with the geopolitical situation around us today. And we need to understand where we are, what we need to do, where we are lacking, and how do we cover it up. Thank you, sir. I think it's going to be a eye-opening sort of a discussion for especially for people like me who want India to be in a place of its own self-sustenance defense.
Thank you very much, Adi. It's always a pleasure being on your show. And Jai Hind to all your viewers. I hope we have a different type of a take on Aatmanirbharta today. Let's see how it goes.
Sir.
Thank you.
Sir, Aatmanirbharta in defense, we've heard the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh also talk about it. Recently, we had certain items which were put on the ban list. This was this year. There was some stuff done earlier as well. Of course, there are huge amount of doubts whether what's going to happen operationally and this and that. Leaving that apart, sir, what does India need to do in terms of prioritizing its base in terms of technology, which seems to be the key of the entire game? Having the technology is the base of. I mean, it's one of the reasons we've not been able to make an engine. Correct me if I'm wrong. What are the technologies that you would kind of recommend to focus on for us to start working on this particular dream?
Yes, that's a great question. Essentially, defense technologies, there's such a wide spectrum that no country, really speaking, can get a handle and manufacture or be self-reliant in all those technologies. And in any case, as far as India is concerned, there are many big ticket items which have been which other countries have already got their key technologies in, and so to be able to catch up on all of them, according to me, should not be the aim. So we should be able to zero in on certain technologies which are most relevant and which India's inherent strengths can be exploited. My conviction is that there being such a wide spectrum of defense technologies, India should focus on a limited set of technologies which can leverage its strengths, its basic strengths, and which I'll come to what are those basic strengths, and also linked to the fast changing character of warfare. Because warfare is changing so fast and certain technologies are becoming more and more important. So I feel that leapfrogging is the strategy which India should adopt to become world leaders in certain subset of technologies. And as far as the others are concerned, it would be a mix of procurement from others and maybe developing on what we already have. In certain things, as you know, we already have our own internal manufacturing going on. So that is the overall strategy. Now, before I get on to how to identify these technologies, I would also like to bring out a couple of points. The approach which I am going to give out is a little different. It has got a lot of introspective element as far as the armed forces is concerned, and there is a transformative element to the approach. It is not an incremental approach, and why I feel that this approach is feasible is because what I see in today's government and the entire will of the nation, the way it is progressing, I feel we are in a position to take on these transformative steps and not move about in an incremental manner. So this is the before I start with the actual answer to your question, I wanted to bring out this point. Now coming on to which technologies. For that, let us look at the manner in which warfare is changing. And it's just some key points which I'm bringing out. So essentially, over the last, let's say, 3 decades, it is the ICT technologies, information and communication technologies, which have made themselves felt on the battlefield and the nature of battle space has changed. Now, when I say information and communication technologies, what are the operational concepts? So we have two operational concepts which come out of, which are based or which are triggered by the ICT technologies. One is referred to as network-centric warfare. Now, without going into too much detail, all I want to bring out is this involves battlefield networks on the one hand, static as well as battlefield networks, and what is referred the application, that is the tactical command and control and communication tax C3I and C4 ISR. I mean, these are the types of applications which function on this, which changes the manner in which you fight wars. It's called network centric warfare. That's one operation, concept which actually was felt for the first time in a very dramatic manner during the first and thereafter the second Iraq wars. That's when the net centrity aspect and how ICT technologies made a change, complete change in the manner in which battles are fought were seen. The second concept is information operations. We have had a full episode on information operations, which looks at cyber operations, electronic warfare, and cognitive operations. So there are certain types of technologies involved there. So these are two operation concepts and the related technology. So that's one. This is referred to as the ICT. I refer to it as the ICT revolution in military affairs, and it's referred to as the ongoing revolution in military affairs. The next, a very important and very impactful technology which is going to change or bring in the next revolution in military affairs, I refer to it as a looming AI RMA, because AI, artificial intelligence, in conjunction with robotics, is going to be ubiquitous and infuse every part of how we fight wars. So, but that's going to unfold over the next decade or two. And if we have to get our act together today on be on a launch pad to become a leading power as far as defense technology is concerned, we have to think 2 decades, 3 decades ahead, because that's the time frame it takes to become leaders. And the types of operational concepts which are going to come in, one is, of course, non-contact warfare. With autonomous systems coming in, non-contact warfare is one. Swarm technology and swarm-based warfare, we are seeing some elements of it even in the Ukraine wars to some extent. So it's just about being developed. And the pace of warfare is going to change dramatically. The OODA loop, as they call it, observe, orient, decide, act. So this is all triggered by the artificial intelligence and robotics technologies. So these are two main RMAs, the ongoing ICT RMA and the looming AI RMA and the related technologies which I referred to. Then we come to certain transformative technologies which are coming to the fore, which are not really, and okay, these two which I've just talked about are all dependent on computer science and soft disciplines as underpinning them. You have ICT, information and communication technology, that's all soft disciplines, and super specialization of that is artificial intelligence. And this is where India has its strengths in the soft disciplines. So this is what needs to be leveraged. So this was the first two areas. The third basket of technologies which I want to refer to is what I refer to as transformative technologies, which may not be just soft disciplines. It may have some other elements, but the entire world is working. It's just about these technologies getting involved. So I'll just name 4 or 5 of them. Quantum is one area. Directed energy is one area. Laser, hyper, microwave, even normal RF. So directed energy technologies for counter UAV, counter space type of warfare. Then you have hypersonic weapons. Now we have our strengths in missiles, we have our strengths in space, and hypersonic technologies is an overlap between space and missile technology. So this is where we can leverage. And as you know, the US also has not yet come up with a hypersonic weapon. Russia had demonstrated Kinzhal during the Ukraine war already, and China also has got a hypersonic weapon. So we have also conducted successful tests, although it's not yet operational. So hypersonic is one area. And as you must have heard the Prime Minister and thinks that 5G and Internet of Things. So 5G India is focus on, and application of 5G in defense. And Internet of Things, there is something called military Internet of Things. Now, all these 5 technologies which I have talked about are not really all soft disciplines. There are a lot of other technologies involved here. But I feel India has got strengths here and we should be able to leverage. So these are the areas where I think if we put in our focus and national effort with a strategy in place, we have full potential of being at the forefront, I mean, at the cutting edge of these technologies in the next decade plus.
Makes quite a lot of sense when when you put it because you work on your strengths, and that's something which is very, very simple. You've elucidated a very, very interesting example of space, and hypersonic seems to be the hyper word in terms of military weaponry. Talks are concerned, is something which brought out a lot of huge amount of concern when the Russians demonstrated it. Probably yes, sir. Sir, I'd like to ask you. Atmanirbharta is a new term, fair enough, but India has been trying to do stuff on its own for a long time. Some of it in terms of rocket technology has been successful because of our endeavors in space and stuff like that, which we know it's a legacy sort of a game with us. But a lot of places we see that we've failed. I won't say failed, but we've been slow. We've been not very fruitful in our efforts. Let me put it in a better way, sir. Uh, where did we miss out? And what do you think made these efforts not very successful, sir?
Yeah, again, a great question. I'll tell you my assessment of where possibly we could have done things differently. Now, as you rightly brought out, that it's not only recently with the Aatmanirbharta initiative, but several governments over the last several decades have been putting a lot of thought and making efforts to to you know to make our military industrial complex more effective. So there have been firstly several studies which have been carried out over the years, especially after the Kargil conflict. Post Kargil, there was a Kargil committee review, and a group of ministers was instituted. And one of the recommendations of this group of ministers was that DRDO should focus on core technologies and leave the rest to the industry. So that was one of the primary recommendations. There was a Kelkar committee report in 2005 which recommended the corporatization of the ordnance factories, which now, after 2005, it's been almost 16 years, now it has been done recently by the government. There was a Sisodia committee report of 2007, which had all of these had several recommendations. One of the main recommendations of the Sisodia committee was the Ministry of Defense should be restructured on the lines of the French Directorate of Acquisition. It's got a French name. It should be restructured. The main point being that it had a specialist element. The directorate, unlike our present MOD structure, which is more of a procurement agency, there was a concept of being like project managers and even getting into the architecture of systems. So more specialized nature of the architecture. So that was one of the recommendations of the Sisodia committee. The Ramarao committee was there in 2008, which recommended a Defense Technology Commission. And they also recommended equivalent of DARPA. The US DARPA. So equivalent of DARPA should be raised. We call it DRADS, Board of Research for Advanced Defense Science. So these were the various studies which have been done. In addition, the policy. So policy has been continuously being changing and being more, let's say, friendly as far as the industry and procurement is concerned. The defense procurement procedure, which today is called the defense acquisition procedure, was initially, the first one came out in 2002. And thereafter in 2005, 6, 8, 9, 11, 13, 16. So many revisions of the defense procurement procedure have been done. And finally, now we have the defense acquisition procedure 2020. There's also a draft defense production and export promotion policy of 2020. So two major changes were made in 2020 itself. You have in the DAP, etc., you have what are referred to as the make one and make two procedures amongst a whole lot of other procurement procedures. The make one and make two procedures are specific to encouraging indigenous R&D, very close to what Aatmanirbharta focus is there. And then, of course, you had these after the Aatmanirbharta initiative, the negative list which you announced, 101 list of 101 items in 2020, 108 items in 2021, and very recently another 107 items. And certain amount of budget has been, earmarked for private industry. So all these steps have been taken. Still, despite these efforts of the last 15 years or more, the industry, I mean, we've not been able to make much headway. Of recent times, there have been certain progresses which are good, but really speaking, as you also your assessment also says that really speaking, the desired pace of progress had not been. You had, of course, the corporatization ordnance factories, which has just been done. Most of the recommendations of these studies and all, really speaking, the major ticket recommendations were not really implemented. The lesser recommendations, a number of them were implemented. So much about what has been happening so far. What in a major, if we look at it from a big picture perspective, according to me, all the recommendations which have been made so far and the changes in policy which have been made so far are focusing on easier procurement, easing the procurement process, and the R&D process per se has not been analyzed and what should be done to improve how we as a nation carry out research and development per se. That doesn't form the meat of the efforts which have been made over the past couple of decades. So that's my main point. The focus on innovation, the leveraging of industry and academia. How should we go about? Where are our weaknesses? Why aren't we able to leverage industry and academia? So that focus has not been there, and that is what I feel is the main issue where we have been going wrong. So I feel, in summary, that in addition to the defense acquisition procedure, focus on procurement, there needs to be a national strategy for defense innovation. So that's the focus on innovation. That's where we need to also focus as much as, if not more than, the procurement procedure does.
Yeah, that's something which seem when you talk about it, it seems a little odd that every time we talk about defense equipment, the biggest question that comes out is about यार वो खरीदा कैसे है, कहाँ से आएगा, this and that, and the question of कैसे बनता है, how is it done, what is the base technology of it, is something I'm not saying I've not heard, I'm just saying we don't even see it in writings, we don't see it in talks about this particular issue, that how do we make this thing. It's it makes a bit of a makes someone wonder that whether it's mainly a thought process that we've lacked all these years, sir. So that's some thought that came to me. So as I was saying, sir, in the past, the concern towards procurement was more than what we kind of realized, and if you would have put that much focus on R&D as you're bringing out, we would have been in a much better, in a different place. So now today our R&D is not very good, and we've started doing a lot of stuff. There is no question, and it's a matter of pride that there are so many in the negative list, so many items which have come, and I'm sure as the time goes by, things will go further. The transformation that you were also referring to, that this whole game needs to be changed completely. What is it that you have in your mind, and how do we kind of even begin to talk about something like that, sir?
Yeah, I did talk about transformative steps, and before I give out what my recommendations are as far as how we need to go about it, again, there is one point which I would like to make. One is that, and that point is that my suggestions, while they are some of the transformative steps, have definitely to be done with the at the apex level, at the national level, as will emerge once I give my recommendations. But it is a lot to do with an introspective look as to what is the role of the armed forces and where they should be in this entire defense R&D process.
Okay.
R&D, as far as the industry, has generally been weak in the industry per se. But as far as defense R&D is concerned, I feel that the manner in which the role which the armed forces play in the defense R&D process has to be quite different from what is happening. So this is the overall point. Now, before I come on to the actual transformative contours of those transformative steps, let me just highlight other countries, how they are global powers, the leaders in military technology, how do they go about it? And while we can talk a lot on that issue per se, I'll just take two examples. One of the US, which is a leader and a huge, country which has huge resources devoted towards R&D. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have a small country, Israel, which is also a leader in military technology with much lesser GDP, but still it is producing certain technology which are cutting edge in the world. So let's see how, and again, a very couple of highlights of how they are going about this whole process so that we can compare with our own. So, for example, the US, we have all heard of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It is characterized by high risk, high payoff R&D. And you will be surprised the number of people in DARPA are very few. I think just about 100 odd managers and some other staff is there. All the research in DARPA is carried out extramural. That means the research is carried out by research institutions, academic institutions, industry, and not within DARPA. DARPA is only managing it. So that's one part. Then they have federally funded R&D centers. They have university affiliated research centers.
Yeah.
Then very many people do not know this. For example, their four services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Now let's look at Army. It has got a Army Combat Capability Development Command. And we are surprised to know that this command, which is overseeing the R&D within the Army, has got a strength of roughly 14,000 people working captive to the Army. 14,000 people working on R&D aspects captive to the Army. There are about 8 laboratories in which these 14,000 are distributed. Similarly, you have the Air Force Research Laboratory, which is a very largest, many branches of this laboratory, which has got roughly 10,000 people working in R&D captive to the Air Force. Then you have the Office of Naval Research, another about 2.5 to 3,000 people are there. You have something like something called the Defense Innovation Unit. So the amount of resource which is captive to the armed forces to carry out R&D in addition to DARPA, which is under the Department of Defense, is humongous. So if we compare with ours, we'll find that, okay, we are not even scratching the surface as far as how we are structured internally. If we try to compare, nobody's saying that we can, sort of do what the US is doing, but at least take some cues from what is happening there. Now, that was a big nation, the leader of military technology in the world. Now, let's look at Israel, which has got 1/8 the GDP of India. And as far as defense exports are concerned, it is 30 times in quantum, 30 times what India exports in defense technology. I'm giving you the figures of the period 14 to 19, which is comprehensive, available in the CPRI databases. 30 times. So 1/8 the GDP, 30 times the exports. If you multiply, it comes to a multiplicative figure of a differential of 2,400. I mean, if we are saying that GDP is what matters, so there's something which is amiss, which they are doing, which we are not doing, and we have to analyze that. So I'll just elaborate on one or two things, although there are a whole lot of factors which we can study, but one or two things. They have a system where they they go through a deliberate exercise for identifying scientific mindsets right from schools and colleges for recruitment into the armed forces. Then they have a system where they recruit them. There's a Talpiot program. They recruit them, maybe serve for 6 years, and if they want to continue, they can continue. If they don't want to continue, then they go back to the industry and continue contributing. These people, they continue contributing after having left the service in the defense industry. So that is one part of it. And the researchers, the number of researchers in the country per se, as against 200 per million in India, they have 8,000 per million. And that's the maximum in the world. The US has got something like 2 or 3,000 per million, I think, 2 or 3,000 if I'm not wrong. So the focus on research, there are many other factors, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. And the Directorate of Defense R&D, which they have, something like a MOD, defense production, is controlled by a combination of MOD and the Israel Defense Forces. So there's a combined effort to run that defense R&D. So we'll, once we go into how we go about doing it, we'll see what are the differences. So these are the highlights of the biggest and one of the smallest, both of them defense technology leaders in the world. So having spoken about this, let's look at what am I trying to say, what we need to do as far as India is concerned. Today, the pivot of defense R&D, you will agree with me, and I think it is generally known across, that it is the DRDO, which carries out defense R&D. It makes use of the industry for some subsystems, etc. There are hardly any products which the industry is developing directly for the defense forces. So there may be some, there are some in fact, but in summary, what I'm trying to say is DRDO is the pivot. I am saying that armed forces need to be the pivot of defense R&D. So this is a major shift from DRDO being a pivot, and DRDO, the chairman being part of the Ministry of Defense, he's a secretary in the Ministry of Defense. So I'm saying the armed forces should become the pivot, the driver of defense R&D. Why do I say that? Now, I feel there are three requirements for a pivot to function successfully. One is that it should have domain knowledge of the military. Second, it should have knowledge of the technology per se. And third, it should have the authority to drive the R&D process. So three elements. Now, what is the status today? Armed forces have got the domain knowledge about how the defense forces function. It has that. As far as specialization is concerned, it is definitely better than what is there in the MOD today. But there's a lot more needs to be done within the armed forces. And of course, it has got no authority. The DRDO and MOD, it has got a better technology, hang of technology is better within the DRDO, we cannot contest that. But it has hardly any knowledge. I mean, I'm talking of the requisite degree of knowledge about how the processes within the military work. Yeah. So I think that is a big drawback as to why, on its own, without the correct interfaces, DRDO is not able to produce the requisite equipment. There's always a gap between what is required on ground and what the DRDO produces. So, in my own assessment, armed forces are well placed to raise the specialization level to the desired degree by changing its HRD processes alone. And if it is given the authority for defense R&D by the Ministry of Defense, then it is best placed to act as a pivot, because they are the ultimate users and they have the driving force. They want this equipment to come through. So the commitment is there. Specialization can be brought. Knowledge of the domain expertise, what is required on ground is there. So they are best placed to make the necessary changes to act as an effective pivot, which today an effective pivot is not there as of now. So that's one part of the concept. The second part of the concept is that for this to happen, the armed forces have to go in for something which I refer to as participative R&D, which I'll elaborate on a little
Yeah.
later. So, based on these two pillars, this transformation process which I'm talking about works out. The various stakeholders which are there in this entire defense military industrial complex are very obvious. There's a Ministry of Defense, we have the DRDO, we have industry, we have academia, and we have armed forces. Amongst these, a synergy needs to be created, and with an effective pivot, this synergy can be created. So that's the overall concept of transformation which I'm trying to put across.
I mean, it does make sense at the end of it to put the armed forces within the whole gambit of development, because the end of it, they have the vision of what they're looking for. And of course, they keep in touch with latest, more and more innovative stuff which comes around the world. So warfare, as you mentioned in the beginning, at the opening, that warfare is changing. So the best people to understand that warfare would be armed forces people as well. Another advantage I see in what you're trying to say is because the armed forces maintains the equipment as well. So there will be a certain amount of skilled manpower whose skills could be re-enhanced to take up roles like this. I'm not sure how feasible that would be because the technology scopes are much higher, but I'm sure there is some sort of scope there. So you've given very good examples. You've told us about Israel and America, and they're very, very fine examples about defense technology. Today, they have Israelis. So
yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points to what I said. As far as the overall contours are concerned of the transformation process.
Sure.
So, in addition to the points which I brought out, I would say that for this transformation to work, restructuring is required. Certain types of structures would have to come in. So this is where the government comes into play, because without the government's approval, new structures cannot come. Certain restructuring can be done within the armed forces, but certain structures requires the backing of the government. And secondly, there's a transformation within the armed forces, which is needed to be done. In its current form, I told you a level of specialization has to be achieved and certain other things. So there are two other pillars which come into the picture. One is restructuring and one is transformation within the armed forces. This is how the transformative process works. This is what I would do. Thank you.
So I'm just going to not expand any more on what you just said, but let me just ask you two simple breaks and short, very questions. Would be restructuring you're talking about, and what kind of restructuring are you looking at, or would you propose for such a thing to go forward? And how do you think, logically it makes sense. How do you think the result flow would be better with kind of this sort of a restructuring done?
Right. Now, let's see what are the current structures for carrying out, by structures I mean organizational structures. What is it that we have today? And then I'll indicate as to what needs to be done in terms of new structures. There's nothing very too much of manpower intensive. It is not those type of things, but certain structures need to be brought in. So starting with what is happening today, how do we carry out defense? How do we drive defense R&D as far as the armed forces are concerned? So we have, in general, we have project management organizations within the armed forces. And these project management organizations, you have people getting posted to them on a tenure basis. In the army, the tenures are of the order of, let's say, 2.5 to 3 years, and people come and go. Some of them are adequately qualified, others are not really, do not have the requisite qualifications which are desirable in these project management organizations. I think that the Navy and the Air Force, in terms of the HRD management, are better. And they are able to, let us say, post people with longer tenures. For whatever reasons, they are able to do that. But still, the overall, the number of people, I'll remind you of the numbers which are there in the US. So when we compare with that, and even let's say if you look at Israel, the number of people who are constantly working and focused towards R&D, that culture of specialization is not there. So to give you some specific examples, we have something called, for example, the Directorate General of Information Systems, which has been in existing for in various avatars for several decades now. So that is what is responsible for all the applications. I mentioned to you the tax C3I and the C4 ISR systems. So it is responsible for that. Now, for 3 decades, it has been working on these systems. There have been some successes, but largely speaking, the progress has been pretty unsatisfactory. And I feel the reason is it can be improved just by improving, changing the manner in which we handle these organizations. So this is an existing structure, right? Then, if we look at artificial intelligence, something which we need to, even several years back, we need to have started on a very big manner in progressing these technologies. So today, there was a task force for artificial intelligence which was instituted by the Ministry of Defense in 2018, and there were 2 structures which came up: a Defense AI Council and the Defense AI Project Agency. The Raksha Mantri is the chairman of the first, and the Secretary of Defense is the chairman of the second. It came up in 2019 or so, 19 or 19, I think. These 2 agencies came up. Thereafter, the percolation down in the services, some specific to AI, how do you facilitate the induction of AI into the armed forces, has not really happened. So now, having said this much about the current, my recommendations, the way I think about it is as follows. Firstly, we need to come up, just like the committee said earlier, that we need to come up with an Indian DARPA. Now, stating that we need to come up with an Indian DARPA is very easy. The important part is who mans DARPA. The right people should man it with the right commitment, so they are able to carry out or drive the R&D process. Today, there is no equivalent of DARPA as of now, and that is why we are not able to, pursue cutting-edge R&D as far as driving from the department, from the armed forces is concerned. So, an equivalent of Indian DARPA is one suggestion. Then, my second recommendation is a defense innovation. Now, I may have picked these terms from, let us say, the US, even Israel has got, France has got an equivalent of a defense innovation unit. But we should look at the concept. The concept of such a unit, a proper establishment, you can call it a unit, you can call it an establishment. The whole idea behind the establishment is to make use of the technologies which are already being used in the commercial sector and how they can be usefully employed and leveraged for defense applications. This is referred to as civil-military fusion in technology terms. So, the Defense Innovation Unit, by whatever name you might, if you don't want to use the same names as abroad, such a unit is required whose focus is, unlike DARPA, the focus of this is to identify technologies which are already available in the civil and apply and use them or leverage them, find out the manner in which they can be leveraged for defense applications. So this is Defense Innovation Unit. Then one of the major big ticket reforms which I am recommending, which would raise many eyebrows, I suppose, is to place the DRDO under the control of the armed forces, which means restructure DRDO as service laboratories on the lines of the service laboratories which are there in the US. Now, why am I saying this? And it cannot function just by giving an order. So there are many connotations to this entire thing. So why I'm saying this is, today the accountability of the DRDO is there to the Ministry of Defense, not to the users. And this is, according to me, a lacuna where the users don't have a leverage over the R&D agency. Then it is very difficult for the process to move smoothly. So instead of reporting to the MOD, a lot of thought will have to be given to it. It can't happen. There are these suggestions, some suggestions of this nature, at least some labs were actually approved for being placed under the Air Force and things a few years back, but never really got implemented. So just like there was a huge resistance to the corporatization of the ordnance factories, so I'm saying this is a big ticket reform which can't happen, but it has a due thought process has to be given. But if they become captive to the armed forces, I feel the results are going to be much better. So this is a big ticket reform. Then there need to be military incubation centers affiliated to the universities and research institutions. Now, what is the idea behind this? The idea behind this is to directly leverage the intellectual capability of our academic and research institutions to carry out research for defense. Directly leverage. Today, what is happening is there is a certain structure in place, but they are weak in my assessment. I've been in those structures and I've interacted with academia through those structures, and I feel they are weak. So we need to establish innovation hubs within the research institutions. Certain efforts are being made, but they are not strong enough. So this is another area in which we need to make determined, deliberate steps and make it happen. With the right people also posted there. So HRD is going to come. I mean, this is a big issue. The HRD itself is an issue which has to be handled. And then for AI itself, the US created something called a Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. I'm giving the example of the US, not because we want to ape the US or something, but because firstly, information about the US is quite readily available. It's also world leader. If you try to get similar information about China, you will get some information. There are a lot of people information available in the open domain about China, but it's very clear, much clearer as far as the US is concerned. And we need to take ideas. What is the idea behind a joint artificial intelligence center? It's a set of, as far as the US is concerned, it's a set of about 200 personnel posted to the joint artificial intelligence center, and then their whole focus is not to do research, but to facilitate, to identify, to understand firstly what AI is capable of doing, and act as a handshake between the research which is going on in the civilian world and translate it in the AI domain, translate it to how it can be applied in the force services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. So that's the idea. Now, this is something you can say on the lines of Defense Innovation Unit, but this is focusing purely on artificial intelligence, and I feel a separate setup just to look at artificial intelligence per se is needed to facilitate this. So these are the 5-6 different types of structures which I feel need to be created, and and the total personnel involved in creating these structures are really speaking, the new structures that is, are really speaking not more than a couple of thousand, not even 1,000, in fact less than 1,000, but adequately qualified people, about 1,000 people. If they are put in these structures, I feel the R&D process can function better. Another point which I wanted to just make, this to do with the overall concept. It is that what is the role of the armed forces in the R&D process per se? So as of now, the thinking is, or the methodology so far over the last at least 4 decades that 4.5 decades that I've been watching, is that we create the qualitative requirements for whatever product we need, and then we give it to the DRDO, we even float it to the industry, and through those academic structures, certain things are also given to the academic institutions, and we expect them to produce it. So our job finishes means one of the primary jobs is to create the QRs for it, and thereafter, once the product is ready, after that we do the trials and evaluation of that. Yeah. And having done and of course we do the project management through our PMOs. We monitor, but monitor means what? We don't go into how the technology itself is getting developed. We just monitor, okay, certain milestones are being met, etc. It's a staff sort of a monitoring. It's not a technical monitoring in that sense, a staff monitoring. And thereafter, once the product is delivered, we carry out trials and evaluation, and once found successful, it is fielded. So that's the today's concept of what is the role of the armed forces. But I mentioned the word participative R&D. I feel that the focus of the role of the armed forces itself needs to change to a participative R&D. So structures and the overall concept is what I brought out so far.
Interesting. So, I mean, you've basically said the armed forces need to get involved in this rather than just giving the requirement and testing it later on. Do you think with the current, if you look at our security scenario, we've got a huge border on the west and the east and north and a whole lot of other issues around the place as well. Do you think we are ready to cope up? The armed forces and its personnel are ready to cope up with such a responsibility which will be there on them to kind of lead this entire initiative? Uh, if not, what do you think we need to do within the force to kind of be able to do something like this?
Yeah. So here I come up with the introspective part of what the armed forces need to think about and the changes which need to be brought about within the armed forces to be able to take on this pivotal role. Because if we just create those structures, if we, let's say, with a one line direction, I remember taking part in a panel discussion with a former defense secretary who was there. And he says, okay, if you want the DRDO to report to you, it's just a one line direction which needs to go from the from the Ministry of Defense. And the command and control channel will change. But it's not going to function like that.
Yeah.
Because if people who are controlling the DRDO or who are, let's say, if the DRDO becomes accountable, then we are driving the DRDO process. And if you are not competent of doing it, then it will be a step in the backward direction of productivity. So the armed forces need to make some changes in the manner in which they go about doing things. And these are the changes which I'm saying. So, and what I said is equally applicable for the other structures. You can create a DARPA, but it will mean nothing if it is not the right people are not there and the right approach towards R&D is not there. Similarly, you can create a DIU, but if you have people coming who are not adequately qualified, you just send them for 2 years to the DIU and then they are out again. Again, it will have zero impact on improvement in the R&D process. So one has to be competent to handle those structures and become competent to sit in a driving seat with DRDO under you. If we are unable to do that, then the whole exercise will be an exercise. In fact, it will be an exercise, retrograde exercise. So, what are these things which are required to be done? And whatever I am going to suggest is really speaking, in my assessment, can easily be done in a manner of, it's just a question of the right conviction coming in, and the policies can be changed in no time. And within a matter of year or two, the entire, transformation within the armed forces can take place. Within a couple of years, the entire transformation can take place. So, what are these steps? So, there are 4 or 5 of them. And the very first one has to do with mindsets. Like I said, everything starts with conviction. I am speaking with a certain degree of conviction because I have been on every side, including hands-on R&D to project management to trials and evaluation. Every sort of aspect of R&D with significant equipment I've carried out, and I'm convinced that the types of measures which I am saying can easily be implemented provided the conviction exists. So it starts with mindsets. The first conviction that has to be there, a mindset change needs to be there, is that are we feeling that technology is so important that we want to change the manner in which we want to work? Or are we happy with the state of affairs as they exist today? After all, We have our equipment. We are a very competent armed force. We've been able to win some great great wars. 17 War is a classic example of. I don't think there's an equivalent of such a operation anywhere else. So we are a very, very competent army or armed forces, I would say. But are we looking at the manner in which warfare is changing? Are we convinced that technology is playing an ever greater role? So if we feel there is a need for these, let's say, concepts like network-centric warfare, how much importance do we give to information operations where cyber technologies are involved, or electronic warfare, directed energy, UAVs are coming up? If there are swarms which are likely to come up in the next few years, then how do you counter those swarms? Directed energy weapons are one of the best suited ones. And you have counter space technologies are going to become important. So if you're convinced about technology, making changes on the battle space in a very, let's say, fast manner, then we would be in a position to make those changes, or be convinced enough to make those changes within the armed forces, right? So that's one. The second aspect is what in the armed forces is considered to be the charter. So as I said, so far we were of the mindset that our job is to make QRs, and it is the job of the DRDO and the industry to come up with solutions. So in simple terms, that was our method of looking at R&D. And I am proposing that no, we have to take several steps forward. We have to be in step with the scientists who are working on, the researchers who are working on these new technologies. Now, what is meant? Why am I saying this first? For, let us say, industrial age warfare, which we refer to as industrial age warfare, where tanks, aircraft, ships, etc., big ticket items. So that was the warfare which we've been fighting so far, and much of it is also being seen in the Ukraine operations, for example. But at the same time, you see elements of this information and cognitive domains also coming in. So while a lot of people will say, okay, what has cyber done? You'll find that in the cyber domain, a lot of effects have been felt in the Ukraine war itself, which has not really emerged with full force to the normal listeners so far. So, and that's still, it's just about a 10-year-old warfare where real progress has been made. And AI is going to make itself felt over the next 2 decades. So we have to watch these. So the charter, I was on to the charter part. What I was trying to say is for these technologies which are based on soft disciplines, the process in which the armed forces function is very closely related to how you develop these technologies. So and it cannot be put in a QR. So that is why in the team, the research teams which are working at various places, people in uniform with the right technical knowledge have to work shoulder to shoulder with the research scientists. I mean, in a very simple term, I'm bringing out this, that it has to be much more participative. It has to go much beyond QRs, and you have to be in sync with the research scientists and possibly even contribute to some extent to the research per se. But I'm not really saying the research is done by people in uniform, but they have to be shoulder to shoulder. And I refer to these types of this class of people as soldier scientists. And this is exactly what Israel is achieving. US may not be going in for this process of soldier scientists because they have a different way of going about it. They have the laboratories where people are they're captive to them. But as far as Israel is concerned, they have a concept of soldier scientists. So this is what I'm proposing. So we have to create soldier scientists, and this brings in the point about specialization. Today, specialization is already existing in the armed forces in many ways, not just technology specialization. So if you have, by nature of the structure of the armed forces, if you have an armored corps vertical, if you have an infantry vertical, well, the infantry infantry personnel are specialized in fighting the infantry battles, and armored corps is specialized in fighting armored corps battles. And similarly, the fighters and the helicopters, there's already a degree of specialization everywhere, and so also in technology. The point to note is that as far as technology is concerned, there are enough people who are adequately qualified, but they are not employed in a manner where they can work and contribute usefully and leverage that. So there has to be a concept of multiple tenures, project based tenures, and they have to be high profile officers. The career should not get there's a today we have these philosophies in all three services, but more so in army and to some extent in air force, that you have to have a sector profile. So you've got to serve in all types of geographical terrain for you to be capable of rising to the higher ranks. There's a point behind that, but this has to be rethought. So sector profiles. Then there's also you have to tenant all sorts of appointments. So this is called rounded profiles. So sector profiles and rounded profiles is creating generalists. Even out of specialists, it's creating generalists. If we just change this, because when we talk of a specialist person who's capable of contributing to an R&D process, I would say 20% is qualification and 80% is the on-the-job employment of that person. Today, an MTech, if somebody does an MTech from outside, he generally gets 1 or 2 tenures at the most after he's done his MTech, which has to do with the MTech. Rest of the time he is doing other things. So this has to be exploited. And of course, more cadre has to be created. So there are many angles to it. Specialization, there's another angle to it. One is the aspect of ownership. So today, for example, there is no owner for, let us say, the software-driven things, taxi 3I systems. There are a lot of application software involved there. So there is no, this is reference to the army. So there is no one directorate which is, let us say, the owner directorate for developing all software. So what happens is that the software expertise is very, even though there are a lot of software engineers all over the place, but the software expertise gets limited and that is left to the developing agency. Now, if you take the example of AI, for example, AI is a ubiquitous technology. It's going to be proliferate across all systems. But as of now, there is no one organization or any organization per se, which is looking at AI. So that's why I suggested an organization like equivalent of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, if it is created as a structure, then it will have ownership. Whoever is manning that, there'll be an ownership, and thereafter it can facilitate the project. So ownership is one aspect of it. Centers of excellence have been created. For example, the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering is a center of excellence for cyber warfare, for electronic warfare, or even artificial intelligence has been declared as a center of excellence. But it has been declared as a center of excellence, but the right resource has not been given for it to focus on this. It is in addition to all other things which it is already doing. So resource also has to be given. And finally, okay, one point about the PMOs. We have a large number of PMOs which are manned. If we want to do participative R&D of all types of projects where our people need to be part of the teams, then the quantity of people devoted to project management per se and their quality, and of course together with the tenures, the HRD part itself needs to be increased. So these are all the things which need to be done within the armed forces to be able to make a change. So essentially, what am I saying? I'm saying that we need to understand that firstly, starting from what the first question which you asked, from operational concepts, soft disciplines, we focus on soft disciplines, and if those are the soft disciplines, then participative R&D is what is required. And we need to create our structures and the right HRD processes so that we can be closely working with the scientists to push through the R&D process for these cutting edge new technologies which are appearing in the battle space. Now, last point which I would want to make here is that in this entire approach, there are actually two types of steps which I have recommended. One are the internal, which are internal to the armed forces. The ones which are internal, for example, change in HRD policies. It requires no resource, it just requires decisions to be taken within the armed forces. Policy changes to human resource development and even creating certain internal structures by reallocating resources can be done. So, for example, if you don't get quick government approval for, let us say, an organization like the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, because raising organizations takes time and government approvals, you can always reallocate certain things and certain ad hoc structures can be created for the time being because we're already well behind time. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that many of the things can be done purely by taking decisions within the armed forces, and other things are required, which require government approval, will possibly take a little longer. But I feel that with the current intent, if the problem is projected correctly to the government, then even that is likely to happen. As it is, we can see the intent of the government to become Aatmanirbharta defense technologies, how much effort is being put. So if we are just looking at a few structures which are, less than 1,000 personal worth, a few hundred, I'm sure if put across correctly, and if armed forces want to take on that responsibility of running it in this manner, it can be achieved. So I hope all that I have said has made some sense in because it's a rather complex area to deal with, and a lot of brainstorming is also required. But these are my ideas on what I call really as defense R&D with armed forces as pivot. That is a central issue. Armed forces should become pivot for the defense R&D process, and in addition to procurement, we need to focus on the R&D process for Aatmanirbharta and defense to be successful.
I don't think there is any question one can ask about the factor that the R&D and the entire requirement of the armed forces should be led by the armed forces itself, because at the end of it, you know what car you want. It's not, you can't have some third guy figure out what car you want and give it to you, and then you keep going up and down with the changes and this and that. And that's something which we know, which happens within our little bit of an internal process. So I don't think there is anything that one can actually put across as this thing. Of course, one of the points that you said, what would be required to be done, is the mindset. And I think that is the biggest hurdle within this entire process, is not anything else, because changes obviously have a lot of backlash, which we expected with, as you mentioned, the ordnance board factories as well, sir. So things went up and down. We see a couple of issues with the Air India as well. So these kind of changes obviously will have their little jumps and boards and stuff like that. But I guess in the larger picture, when you look at it, and as you very rightly put across, is that the armed forces need to become a pivot and the driving force behind the R&D which is required for the defense of the nation. And of course, identification.
I want to add, let me just clarify a little more.
Sir.
You see the issues like this, that this approach of, when we had simpler items where you could put things down on a QR and give it to the industry or DRDO, and maybe many of the things also got produced, simpler things earlier. This change of thinking that armed forces need to get into the act of actually participating in the R&D process. Now, that's the change of mindset, which has not been there over the years, over the decades. So far, that mindset has never got developed. Project management was the end point, And beyond project management, it is not our work, and that we are not capable of. Possibly that thinking is there, that we are not meant to do this. We are meant to fight wars and not to carry out R&D. Now that's the thinking. There's a logic behind that thinking also. But what I'm trying to say, having watched as to how our, there's another important point which needs to be looked at, that our defense industrial complex, military industrial complex, our industry, our DRDO, our academia, the knowledge of armed forces is very weak.
Yeah. Hmm.
Whereas in some countries, at least, that may not be true. And if you give out a QR and thereafter do just a project management, maybe things get done. Quite possible. But it is not the case. If you talk to the industry, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, etc., who want to do something, but they are unable to because they do not know how exactly it is to be done. On our taxi systems have not really, most of them have not fructified because there has been a mismatch between what is required. Whereas the technology which was needed for this taxi system, really speaking, only existed within the country. It could easily have been done. So this is what I'm saying. The participative R&D and taking on that additional task, would today's chiefs of the three services say, okay, we are the pivot and we'll be responsible for this R&D? That's the point. It's a major change of thinking. Today, you may give your requirements and somebody else is supposed to do it. Now we are saying, no, it's not just a requirement. We are responsible for ensuring that the R&D takes place. It's a major shift of thinking and major shift of responsibility in addition to all the operational responsibilities. So this is what we need to take.
I think it's a big task, but I think nothing is insurmountable once it's in the flow, and one can actually look at the steps being taken, but very baby steps. But what you're talking about is a complete transformational change in the entire setup and everything. And I hope.
And I'm not suggesting something which is it's being done in other countries. So it's not something which is out of the blue or something totally fresh. It is already being these procedures are already being followed and successfully followed in countries which are leaders in military technology. So that is where we are going to take a cue from and then adapt it to our own circumstances.
That note, sir, thank you so much for the talk, the prep. I'm sure that you had to go through and the thought process that you've created. I hope it resounds somewhere. I hope somebody is listening to it who kind of takes it into the stride and kind of sees what needs to be done. Because I don't want to be pessimistic, but the way we are looking at things at the moment, it's going to take us years and years and years, and I don't think we have that kind of time to kind of to wait for that transformational change to happen. We need to look at what's happening in the world, and as you very rightly mentioned, what you're saying is an amalgamation of good things which are taking place in other countries which are being a success. So why not learn from them? There's no question. Thank you so much, sir. Till next time for another subject on Dev Talks. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Adi, and Jai Hind again. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.